President Trump is set to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and optimism is fueling the markets on what officials are calling a substantial framework ahead of Thursday's summit. For more, we're bringing now Yahoo Finance Washington correspondent Ben Worschel. Ben.
Yeah, Josh. So we've had a lot of positive signals from at least the Trump administration over the last 36 hours ahead of this Chinese meeting. There's even been the outlining of what I would describe as kind of 4 headline provisions of what could be in what the Trump administration is calling a deal here, that are all of which are notably market friendly. Number one, most important for markets, is the taking off of potential tariff increases. There is a 100% increase in tariffs that was scheduled to go into effect this weekend. That appears to be off the table, short of some major reversal on Thursday. Second is the expectation of some sort of delay on China's export controls on rare earth minerals. This, of course, was the action that China took earlier this month that started all these tensions, and the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says he expects there'll be some sort of delay there. Third is what are being called substantial Chinese purchases of American soybeans. No number attached there yet, but that would be a big important for U.S. farmers who are currently selling a total of 0 soybeans to China, which is one of the major purchases of it. And then last is the finalization of a deal to spin off TikTok. Treasury Secretary Bessent says that deal is done. Essentially, it just needs kind of final approval from the presidents Trump and Xi. And that's what the Trump administration is laying out explicitly. There's even other hints that there could be more compromise in the offing. The major thing missing at this point, as I've been alluding to, is Chinese confirmation of all this. We do have confirmation from China that there has been progress in talks over the weekend, but it's just in sort of much less glowing terms than you're hearing from the Trump side. China's state media's quote was, in a term that I think lost a little bit in translation, is there's a basic consensus on arrangements. So, and no details there. So historically, China doesn't confirm anything until it's a done deal. So for the moment, farmers, rare earth producers are kind of in suspense, and we're expecting here in Washington that'll continue through this meeting on Thursday before things are fully finalized one way or the other.
So that's China, Ben. There also appears to be some headlines, some movement with America's closest neighbors as well. Fill us in there.
Yeah, so we've got kind of a good news, bad news story there with Canada and Mexico and their tariffs on the U.S. On Canada first is the kind of bad news side of it if you're looking for trade de-escalation. Things are clearly not going well between Trump and Canada at the moment. This is over an ad that used excerpts of Ronald Reagan to slam Trump's tariff plans. Trump announced today, or he announced over the weekend, an additional 10% tariff on Canada that would be on top of the current 35% tariffs on Canada, although we don't have full details there on when or how they're going to go into effect. Trump added to reporters just a few hours ago that he's not planning to talk to Mark Carney for a while, which freezes a lot of existing trade talks that were going on issues like metals and steel in that way. The good news side of it is Mexico. There's another tariff deadline this week that could have seen tariffs increase on Mexico. That is now off the table, according to the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum. She said she talked to Trump over the weekend, and they're giving a couple more weeks there to keep talks continuing there. It kind of keeps a trend we've seen this week where, with his rhetorical fire at least, Trump is very much more aimed at Canada than places like Mexico, which were much more in focus his first term.
All right, a lot of news keeping you busy. Thank you, Ben.
Henrietta, it's good to see you. Let's talk China, first of all, and what we've been seeing come out of Asia in terms of the rhetoric that seems a little bit more positive. So what should we be looking for to see if that rhetoric turns into reality?
Right. We really want to hear from the Chinese delegation, want to hear President Xi confirm that there's maybe going to be some purchases of soybeans, which would be a major relief to U.S. farmers who are struggling under what they're calling Farmageddon right now. A focus on what China says is going to be most important. They have some different language than what we're hearing from Treasury Secretary Bessent and from President Trump. So we're going to want to get confirmation, which probably won't come until Thursday of this week, but definitely looking like we're going to get basically a rewind and a reset back to where we were more towards the beginning of this year, before the escalation threats of the last month.
And what about, in particular, some relief for farmers on the soybean front, right? That we've talked to some farmers. I know that's an acute sort of point of tension between the U.S. and China. So expect any breakthrough there?
This is the critical piece because, of course, not only has China retaliated for President Trump imposing these tariffs when he took office, but they actually have never lived up to their phase one agreement reached during his first term. So China has quite a bit of room to make purchases and grow that they have been spending the last 8 years diverting away to Brazil and Argentina, much to the chagrin of U.S. farmers. So that dynamic is really going to be a lifeline to President Trump specifically, and it has read through to the U.S. shutdown. If China buys soybeans, then the president is under a little bit less pressure to reach a deal with Democrats that could compel them to give some funding for a bailout package domestically. So one of these two things has got to give.
And what about on the rare earths front or rare metals front? What do we expect there? That some sort of negotiation, something worked out?
Yeah, so kind of like I said at the outset, what we're looking at is maybe China reeling it back in as well and saying, okay, the very aggressive restrictions on and licensing requirements that we were going to require will maybe delay. Treasury Secretary Bessent is sort of alluding to potentially a year-long delay. There are officials from Beijing going to negotiate something very similar with the European Union right now to clarify to global market chains that they're going to provide magnets, chemicals, and rare earths that they have a monopoly on while the U.S. is perpetuating this trade war. So a lot of damage control, again, resetting to where we were earlier this year.
Meantime, Henrietta, we have this, continue to have this weird flip on its head of traditional trade relationships, where here we are talking about potentially coming to a framework for a deal with China, where at the same time, you know, the president was upset about that ad out of Ontario, featuring President Reagan. And now we've got higher tariffs on Canada potentially. Do you really expect that to go into effect?
Yeah, I mean, this is really where we get into a question of the Supreme Court case, which is going to have oral arguments next week. The president is imposing tariffs because he didn't like an ad that correctly depicted Ronald Reagan decrying tariffs and explaining that they have a massive regressive impact on U.S. consumers and end up hurting free trade, hurting the U.S. economy just as much, if not more so, than anybody else. So the president's ability to unilaterally impose tariffs wherever he sees fit and whenever he sees fit, at whatever rate, is really the heart of the matter of the Supreme Court case. And I think, frankly, from a legal perspective, he hurt his standing going into oral arguments next week. And that's going to be a major topic of whether the president should have this authority at all.
Henrietta, remind me, how long is that case expected to go? You know, when can we expect a conclusion?
My base case is that we'll find something out in mid-December. The Court of International Trade and the Federal Court of Appeals both found earlier this year that the president does not have this authority to impose tariffs. And they found that from start to finish of their cases in less than 35 days. So there's a lot of optimism in the legal community that we might get this done before mid-December, which would be, lightning quick for the Supreme Court. They don't have to give us a verdict until next summer. But given there's about $4 trillion on the line, people want to know what's up.
Yeah, they definitely do. And speaking of a lot of money being on the line, the shutdown is still happening with you're in a better seat than I am. Any glimmers of hope anywhere there?
I can't even be kind about it. No, there's no hope. There's no forward progress. The House Republican Conference is going to be out all week. They're not even going to be in D.C. With the president over in Asia and not willing to use the auto pen, he will not be signing a bill to reopen the government, even if one comes to his desk. The Democrats are going to be coming back to D.C. They'll be holding press conferences. The whole caucus will be there on the House side. But there's no shakeup in negotiations. There are some federal workers unions who are calling for a vote on the clean CR and for that to pass and reopen the government for at least a little while. But basically, until late next week, I expect we're going to be closed.